Do they know it's Christmas? Do you remember Bob Geldof's song of that title, released in December 1984 as a response to what they thought of as a biblical famine in Ethiopia at that time? It's Christmas time. There's no need to be afraid. At Christmas time we let in light and we banish shade. And in our world of plenty we can spread a smile of joy. But there's a world outside your window, and it's a world of dread and fears, where the only water flowing is the bitter sting of tears, and the Christmas bells that ring there are the clanging chimes of doom. Well, tonight, thank God it's them instead of you. For the multitudes around the world who today are suffering starvation, oppression, disease, death by COVID because of no available vaccine, for those multitudes, what on earth is the relevance of Christmas? And what does Christmas signify for perhaps the majority of people in the socially and financially privileged parts of the world? Christmas is coming. The goose is getting fat. Or in the words of Dave Barry, the American humorist, once again, it comes to the holiday season, a deeply religious time that each of us observes in his own way by going to the mall of his choice. Presents, turkey, mince pies, stomachs full, drink merry, such terms as these describe Christmas for most in the luxuriating first world. But for those of us who are believing Christians, or at least seeking the light of the world, what is the significance of this Advent time? Perhaps Advent is not quite the right word here, being derived from the Latin for arrival. Maybe anticipation would be a better adjective for the season, with Advent reserved for the day when anticipation is realized in arrival. Lee Strobel, former legal editor of the Chicago Tribune and now a well-known Christian apologist, says in his lovely little book, The Case for Christmas, yes, Christmas is a holiday overlaid with all sorts of fanciful beliefs, from flying reindeer to Santa Claus sliding down chimneys. But I became convinced, says Strobel, that if you drill down to its core, Christmas is based on a historical reality, the Incarnation, God becoming man, Spirit taking on flesh, the infinite entering the finite, the eternal becoming time-bound. It's a mystery, backed up by facts that are simply too strong to ignore. What do we make of what Lord Byron referred to as Christmas stories tortured into rhyme, containing the essence of the true sublime? The most controversial of these is the virgin birth. We know that parthenogenesis occurs in nature, but in humans? Lee Strobel again. If I really do believe in a God who created the universe, then for him to create a Y chromosome would be child's play. As so often, it is N.T. Wright's words that bear very serious consideration. The virginal conception of Jesus is not in itself a central major doctrine of the New Testament. None of the epistle writers mention it at all. They clearly manage to mount their wide range of theological arguments without recourse to it. We cannot prove the virginal conception of Jesus to the satisfaction of post-Enlightenment skepticism, but in the light of the resurrection, we are called to be skeptical about skepticism itself. What of the stories of the shepherds and the wise men? The symbolism of these is clear. The shepherds would have been rough-hewn, uneducated, outdoor-hardened men, as working class as they came in those days. They came to the stable as representatives of all the humble folks on earth, to rejoice over this hours-old child in the manger. And the wise men? According to Britannica Online, Babylonian astronomy dates back to about 1800 BC, and was one of the earliest systematic scientific treatments of the physical world. The mass of observations the Babylonians collected and their mathematical methods were important contributions to the later flowering of astronomy among the Greeks. So the names wise men and magi would seem absolutely fit for purpose. These men came to the manger as representatives of the educated elites of their world, and when we consider the gifts they brought, were probably among the wealthier ones as well. The adoration of shepherds and magi can be regarded as a prefiguring of the day when every knee shall bow in heaven, on earth, and in the depths, and every tongue confess Jesus Christ is Lord. Consider now the story in Matthew's Gospel of Herod's slaughter of the innocents. Is this far-fetched, or could it be historical? N.T. Wright again. It is frankly incredible to me that someone living in the century of Hitler, Stalin, and Pol Pot should find it difficult to believe that rulers can slaughter children for their own political ends. Furthermore, everything we know about Herod the Great, mostly from Josephus, who had access to Herod's court records, suggests that he was exactly the sort of man who would have had all the babies in a particular village executed if he had had the slightest suspicion that anyone was talking about a future king being born there. Josephus tells us that this same Herod, around the same time, had several of his own family murdered because of his paranoia about plots against his life. So even if perhaps the foregoing gospel stories have been embellished from the actual facts, it is by no means unlikely that they are, in fact, substantially veridical. Before we turn to the Incarnation itself, bear with me while I digress for a moment to give some perspective on orders of magnitude. How big is a billion? If I count to 1 billion at one number per second, how long will that take? 1 million seconds is about 11.5 days. 1 billion seconds is 1,000 times that, about 31.69 years. 100 billion seconds is more than 3,100 years. According to the European Space Agency, there are about 100 billion stars in our galaxy, the Milky Way. But wait, there's more and more and more. The European Space Agency estimates the number of galaxies in the universe at about 100 billion. So the number of stars in the universe is roughly 10,000 billion billion. Counting them at 1 per second would take you approximately 300,000 billion years, more than 20,000 times the age of the universe. In fact, estimates suggest that the number of stars in the universe is considerably larger than the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on this earth. With that in mind, let's look again at the Incarnation. The story of Jesus' birth tells us of the humility of the Incarnation. The God who created all those billions of stars, not to mention the billions of planets orbiting them, chose to come among us as a human baby. More than that, he was born in a stable and laid in the food trough of the animals who were housed there. What a coming down to earth was that! What then was the point and purpose of this incarnation? In a world filled with so-called gods, perhaps the only way that humanity could really grasp something of the one true God, other than his enormous creative fear-inducing power, was through some kind of direct revelation. And how better to reveal yourself than as someone that people can relate to, a fellow human being? As the Gospel of John says, No one has ever seen God, but God's only Son, he who is nearest the Father's heart, he has made him known. That being the case, we see in the very act of incarnation an indication of God's loving care, in that he chose to come among us not as a king marching in triumph, but as a helpless baby. That alone is a Christmas lesson to the world. Incarnation is, of course, but the beginning of the story. The baby in a manger becomes a man whose life, cruel death, and resurrection opened the eyes of his followers then, and of billions, yes, billions, in the 2,000 or so years since he walked among us, that we might see that the true God is a God not only of power, but more than that, God the loving, compassionate Father. Power. We think of rulers, past and present, of earthly domains as being powerful, sometimes, in their words, all-powerful. In 1817, the British Museum received the fragments remaining of a massive statue of Ramesses II, who may have been the pharaoh whom Moses opposed in the Exodus story. It appears that the discovery of these remains inspired one of the greatest poems in the English language, which Shelley entitled by the Greek name of Ramesses, Ozymandias. Let me read it. I met a traveller from an antique land, who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Like Ozymandias, the once mighty rulers of every age will become dust and forgotten, and their empires with them. But the babe of Bethlehem, who has become King of Kings and Lord of Lords, will outlast them all. In Jesus' own words, heaven and earth will pass away. My words will never pass away. Incarnation. So the Word became flesh. He came to dwell among us, and we saw his glory, such glory as befits the Father's only Son, full of grace and truth.